The first of the writing skills for APUSH that we're going to be looking at are called the short answer questions. So what I'm going to do in this video, and I'm going to keep it a little brief, is just show you kind of the basics of them and then talk a little bit about how we can adapt them to our new distance learning model. This is what the short answer questions can and will look like. So some of them are going to be really short like this, some will be longer with documents attached, and then some will be shorter with just one document attached. I'm going to talk to you about the rules behind them, and then I'll show you some examples for those rules. First, this is the format. You are going to have 3 short answer questions that you will get. Each of them collectively is 1 point, but they're worth weight within it. I'll tell you in a second. Each short answer will consist of 3 parts, a part A, a part B, and a part C. When I talk about one short answer question, I mean one group of those 3. So there's 3 short answers, each part has 3, so there's theoretically 9 points for the short answers that you'll do. There are 2 required questions that the exam will have, and they have specific stimulus prompts, and I'll tell you in a second. You don't pick those, that you do these 2, you have to do them. Then there are 2 others, and you get to pick one of those. Now, there are 3 different skill sets that you will need to show throughout these, and they build it in a way where you have to answer them. So if these 2 are your required ones, then your non-required one would both be the other. So the skills are causation, which is cause and effect, comparison, which is similarities and differences, and then a unique one, it's called a secondary source. It is often called dueling historians, or in this case, opposing historians, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. So let's talk about that stimulus one. Again, I will call these dueling historians, you might see them as opposing historians, but basically the way it works is they give you 2 historians' interpretation of history. These are arguments that they are making. Just like you will make an argument in your longer writing, this is an argument that they made. Usually, as you can assume by the phrase dueling historians or opposing historians, they do not agree with each other. And so very frequently, the questions you'll be asked are, 1, briefly explain one major difference between them. Or here's one, what's an event that proves the argument that one person is making? What's an event that proves the other? Very frequently, that's what you're going to see. If you see these dueling historians, you need to think they don't agree with each other. Why would they give you 2 documents saying the same thing when they can give you 2 documents where people don't agree with each other? That's the secondary stimulus. This one is the hardest of all the rest because this is a skill that you probably haven't used before. So we will focus some on this. But it's also hard because you just don't have the time to read a bunch of books by historical thinkers and authors. So try and think about the language that Foner makes, and Foner's not going to be super pushing an agenda throughout his book, but keep an eye on his interpretation, and we'll work on this skill of how can you pick up in someone else's argument what they're actually trying to say. Another stimulus you can have is this primary stimulus. It's where they're going to give you 1 or 2 primary sources. Again, if you see 2, think about how they might relate to each other. But these are primary sources, so that means they're from the time period. Generally, you're going to see something that talks about what's a difference between these 2. And frequently, you'll see what's a piece of evidence that supports this person's opinion, or what's a piece of evidence that refutes it. The visual stimulus is obviously visual. It can be a political cartoon or a chart, but it's typically a political cartoon. These can be challenging because, well, political cartoons are kind of hard to interpret. So keep an eye on that. Those visual ones can be more challenging. Frequently, this will also be the same. What's the historical perspective that the author is trying to show? And then what are some events that back up or support this or refute this historian's view? So I'm going to put this here. I'll make it a little bit bigger for you there so that you can see. My question to you, what skill is this trying to get to? So you have causation, comparison, and the secondary sourcing. Correct. You should have picked comparison. This says, briefly describe one significant difference between Adams and Rush's understanding. So you are showing differences and similarities between these. That would be comparison. Here's another one. What I'm hoping you guessed is cause and effect, because that is the correct answer to this. One important way in which the Second World War transformed the relationship of the US with the rest of the world. In cause and effect, they're typically going to give you the cause and ask for the effect, or give you the effect and ask for the cause. In this case, they are giving you the cause of the Second World War, and they're asking what the effect, how is this transformation being shown? And this is where we get to a unique part. So obviously the AP exam is written in a test book and it gets turned in. And so on short answer questions, you're actually limited in how much you can write. And so you actually get a piece of paper that has a box on it, and you have to write within that box for each short answer question. If you go outside of that box, it doesn't count. It's not graded. So we're gonna have to work around this a little bit because of it being a digital nature, and I can't give you sheets of paper, but these are limited, so don't think you can just write a whole bunch about them. Now this chart may look a little bit confusing, but let me break it down for you. This is the structure of the short answer questions. So again, you're gonna be writing 3 total. Short answer questions 1 and 2 are required. You do not get to pick them. They are going to come from periods 3 through periods 8. That's why we are going to focus most of our time on periods 3 through 8. Your DBQ is also going to come from periods 3 through 8. And so we're going to go a little bit faster through periods 1, 2, and 9. The first short answer question is going to be a secondary source with a secondary stimulus. It will be a dueling historian. You will have to answer one of those. The second one is going to be one of the other 2 skills, comparison or causation, and it will have a primary or a visual stimulus. And then out of short answer questions 3 and 4, you can see that 3 covers the period 1 through 5, and 4 covers the period 6 through 9. So anywhere within that it could be about. They will be the opposite skill of whatever was in short answer question 2. So you do have to know and demonstrate all 3 skills. Here are my tips on how to be successful. Answer all parts of the question. You get a point for A, a point for B, and a point for C. You need all those points. Try and get all those points. If you don't answer something, you definitely won't get those points. When it comes to the AP exam, the goal should be getting as many points as possible. Now we'll talk about the exam and about all the ways to do that, but for the short answer, it's answering all the parts of the question. Another suggestion I have is label the parts of the question. This is not a requirement from College Board, but I'm going to show you a couple written examples. Now, yes, we are going to be grading some that have happened over time, and it's going to be hard to read handwriting. But what do you notice the difference between these 2 things? Now, you can say the handwriting is terrible in both. That's true. But you can tell that question 3 seems to have these, it has it broken out by A, B, and C. That's easier to read than this, which is kind of all combined. This is my strategy in answering the question. It's the acronym ACE, or ACE. This stands for Answer, Cite, and Explain. So the first thing you need to do is you need to answer the question. If it asks for one piece of evidence that supports something, your answer should be that piece of evidence. Well, Bacon's rebellion shows blah, 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 blah. Boom, 1 sentence, the answer. I'm going to use an example to help guide us through the different parts in this. So the prompt that I'm going to use is this question: briefly explain one important way in which the Second World War transformed United States society. So let's think about our answer. The answer I wrote is U.S. involvement in the Second World War sparked a dramatic shift in female participation in the labor force as more women began working in fields like industry. That's an answer. The question is, what's an important way in which it transformed society? There's my answer for how it transformed society. It sparked a dramatic shift in female participation in the labor force. Now, what I need to do next is I need to prove this. I need to cite an example that supports my answer. And so I chose advertisements focusing on women, like Rosie the Riveter, brought legitimacy to female workers and encouraged women to enter into the labor market. What I'm proving is a shift and an increase in female participation. So my example is Rosie the Riveter and advertisements, which suggested it was good and normal for women to join the labor force. Now for explain, I need to use linkage statements to connect these together. How does my example prove my answer? And so I said, as the US increased its participation in the Second World War, large numbers of adult males were needed for the Army, leading to a decline in the labor pool. Because the US still needed to produce war materials, women were encouraged to join the war effort by working in areas they were previously not allowed to work in. This answer would score 1 point, because this is, again, one part of that. So you'll notice that's one sentence, two sentences, three sentences, 4 sentences. I answered all of that in 4 sentences. You need to be concise and to the point in order to be able to fit in under those restrictions. Now for the rest of the time until the live meeting, I want you to practice this. Let me talk to you about the timing real quick. On the AP exam, you will have 3 short answer questions that you have to answer in 40 minutes. Now, that's a little bit more than like 12 minutes per. What I do in this class is I give you 15 minutes per short answer question that I give you. So if I give you 1, it's 15 minutes timed. If it's 2, it's 30, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So before the live session, what I want you to do is take about 15 minutes. And it's okay if that stretches a little bit, because I know obviously this is probably the first time you've done this, so give yourself a little bit extra time. But I want you to answer this short answer question. So to be clear, the question is, European interaction with the Western Hemisphere drastically changed life for all those involved. And then you are answering these 3 parts of it. It's not 15 minutes per each part, it's 15 minutes total. So on a sheet of paper if you want to handwrite it, on a Google Doc if you want to type it, I want you to answer these 3 questions. So first, I want you to identify the skill that you're showing in these questions. 2, I want you to label the different parts while you do them. So when you're answering this part A, I want you to be like, this is my answer, this is my cite, this is my explain. And do that for B and C, okay? And don't forget, answer, cite, explain. Do all of those things.